Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my honourable colleagues. I'm here on behalf of the hardworking families and my friends of Caribou Prince George. And Mr. Speaker, we have some concerns with this budget that the government released 3 weeks ago. Historically speaking, budgets are presented once a year and they identify planned government spending, expected government revenue, they provide a plan for job growth, and they provide a roadmap for when borrowed money will eventually be paid back. More importantly, Mr. Speaker, they provide hope. In releasing the national budget, government sent a message to Canadians that they have a sound fiscal plan. The budget serves to build confidence with investors, with business, with our political allies throughout the world, that Canada remains stable, that our country is sound, that we will continue to be a leading country for investment, for growth, for partnership. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2016 did one thing extremely well. It confirmed that we're in for another era of broken Liberal promises. A few of these broken promises include tripling the modest $10 billion deficit projection, backing away from their pledge to balance the budget by 2019, and a broken promise to bring the debt to GDP down every year of their mandate. Mr. Speaker, that's not even touching their spending promises. I'd most certainly need more than 10 minutes to get into that. And the price tag, $29.4 billion, Mr. Speaker, for 2016 alone. That's a broken promise of the magnitude of almost 300%. Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure about you, but I cannot run my finances off of credit. And this government is doing just that, maxing out Canada's corporate credit card. Mr. Speaker, over the years, I've been fortunate to be part of a few incredibly talented teams tasked with building business plans, long-term budgets, strategic forecasting where our vulnerability as an industry and as an organization lay. And I can tell you with complete sincerity that no way would a budget with no plan to bring our company flush, let alone turn a profit, would have ever been accepted. So I ask, why should we ask Canadians to approve such a plan, especially when they are the ones that will be left footing the bill for years to come? Not only is this government saddling Canadians with enormous debt, they backed away from the promise of an open and transparent model of government. Mr. Speaker, even a report from the Independent Parliamentary Budget Officer found that the Liberals are hiding information from Canadians, creating their own economic growth projections and exaggerating job growth expectations. Debt doesn't just go away, Mr. Speaker, no matter how hard the Liberals try to wish it away. Borrowed money, Mr. Speaker, is not free money. Mr. Speaker, over the last 20 years, my wife and I have been small business owners, and we know firsthand how challenging it can be to make ends meet. Instead of following through on their election promise to lower small business tax from 10.5% to the Schedule 9%, they left it at the current level. But should this surprise us? The Prime Minister had to say this on this matter during his campaign. We have to know that large percentages of small businesses are actually just ways for wealthier Canadians to save on taxes, to hide money. And we want to reward those people who are actually creating jobs and contributing in concrete ways. Now, we all know the Prime Minister's never had to worry about choosing between putting food on the table for his family or making payroll for his employees at the end of the month, Mr. Speaker. But the constituents in my riding of Caribou Prince George have. I'd like to relay a recent conversation I had with our local farming families. There are over 4,000 beef producers in BC employing roughly 8,800 people directly and indirectly. Beef producers contribute approximately $25 billion to Canada's economy. $35 million of that alone from one of my communities in Caribou Prince George. There are over 68,000 beef producers Canada-wide, yet not one mention of our hardworking farm families in this budget. So, Mr. Speaker, the message I was asked to deliver was this. The hardworking farm families who, for many of them, have worked their operations for generations are small business owners. Their businesses are run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The money they make isn't spent on fancy cars, condos, or vacations. That money is spent directly in the communities they live in. Mr. Speaker, this government failed the hardworking farm families in their speech from the throne, And once again, in their first budget speech, this government failed rural Canada. This is simply unacceptable. Our farm families have faced increasingly challenging times in the last 6 months due to market volatility stemming from this government's lack of recognition of the importance of this vital industry. Mr. Speaker, now that the Prime Minister has approved his first budget, I think he's just figuring out that budgets do not balance themselves. And that is why the Liberal government has chosen to raise taxes on our job creators by ending the hiring credit for small businesses. I can only assume, based on his words, that he believes that these are the wealthy Canadians that can afford to take the hit. Mr. Speaker, Dan Kelly, President of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, said this: "This new government promised to reduce small business corporate tax to 9% by 2019. That promise was broken when they announced the rate will remain at 10.5%, a decision that will cost small firms over $900 million more per year as of 2019. One doesn't need to be an economist to realize that job creators in this country, be it the hardworking entrepreneurs, the local farmers, or the neighborhood grocery store, will find it harder to operate in light of these Liberal tax hikes. Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government was elected on a promise to address perceived infrastructure deficit. To do so, they're borrowing $12 million over the next 5 years. But the majority of this money will not go towards roads, bridges, and public transportation. Infrastructure promises this government was elected on. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals had the perfect opportunity to invest in projects that would provide concrete, long-term benefits in the forms of jobs and increased economic activity. The Canada Transportation Act, released in December, pointed out a need for a national transportation strategy, saying it would be fundamental for Canada's economic development moving forward. Mr. Speaker, Canada is a trading nation. We need trade agreements that allow our producers the ability to compete in global markets. We need secure and seamless movement of these commodities and access for business to and from our country and our communities. This is critical for Canada to remain competitive. Mr. Speaker, I may have missed it, but I do not see any money set aside in the budget for our ports and airports, Canada's vital transportation gateways. So while investment in green infrastructure is commendable and remains important, this Liberal government is so blindsided by their own buzzwords and pet projects that they are failing to invest in the crucial projects that are the foundation of our regional and national economies. Mr. Speaker, I too was elected on a promise to fight for my hardworking constituents of Cariboo Prince George, to keep taxes low, be a strong voice in Ottawa for the people who don't feel they're being heard, to bring the priorities of Cariboo Prince George to Ottawa. And I look at Budget 2016 and I see nothing for rural Canada, nothing for the mills, mines, farmers, or small businesses. Investment in high-speed transit in major centres will not create jobs or opportunities in the industries which fuel the economies of Cariboo Prince George, where people have been hit hard by the downturn in the resource sector. Giving them an additional 5 weeks on EI is nice, but they need jobs, Mr. Speaker. We are still waiting for a softwood lumber agreement. We are still waiting for the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement to be ratified. We are still left with higher taxes, a large national deficit, no additional resources for our police forces, and measures that actually do more harm than good for small businesses that are the backbone of our economy. To my colleagues across the floor, Canadians did not give you a mandate to borrow beyond our means. They did not give you a mandate for a pile of broken promises, and they most certainly did not give you a mandate for higher taxes that will be passed on for future generations. I'll leave you with a quote from the late Jim Flaherty, regarded as the world's best finance minister, who shepherded us through the world's worst economic recession since the Great Depression, while having the strongest job growth in the G7, and keeping taxes low, and balancing the budget. Nearly 150 years ago, Canada was founded with fiscal responsibility as its cornerstone. The men and women who carved this great country out of the wilderness simply called it good government. That's what Minister of Finance John Rose was talking about when he stood before this Assembly to deliver Canada's first budget speech in 1868. He said, "I say, we ought to be most careful in our outlay and consider well every shilling we expend, because, Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve a responsible government that is thinking about long-term interests of this country. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for l'honorable député de... Excusez, c'est le mauvais côté. Drummond.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais remercier mon collègue pour son discours et je voudrais bien sûr parler du budget, poser des questions concernant le budget. Dans ma circonscription, on se pose beaucoup de questions concernant le logement social. À Drummondville, il y a l'association de l'habitation des logements qui est venue me voir et qui m'a demandé qu'est-ce que le gouvernement attendait pour investir dans le logement social. Alors, la promesse du gouvernement libéral était d'investir 520 millions sur 4 ans pour la construction de nouveaux logements locatifs abordables, mais le budget ne semble pas indiquer que ces promesses seront maintenues. Alors, qu'est-ce que mon honorable collègue pense de cela? Parce que probablement que dans sa circonscription aussi, il y a des besoins d'investir dans le logement social et que c'est extrêmement important pour investir, pour permettre aux citoyens qui en ont le plus besoin de s'épanouir et de redevenir productifs dans notre communauté. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
L'honorable député de Prince George, Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank our honourable colleague for the question, and without a doubt, we need to do everything in our power to look after those that are most vulnerable. In my riding, Caribou, Prince George, we indeed do have a need and a necessity for affordable housing. But the questions that I'm getting is that how is this money going to be rolled out? It is a provincial jurisdiction and a provincial responsibility. Who is the government talking to, and how do we get in line for these dollars to be doled out? There has been no plan. Again, more vague answers, more in the coming weeks and months. There is a concern again that this money that has been allocated, or they're talking about it, how it's going to, is it going to make it to rural Canada, or is it simply going to be in the major cities across Canada? Thank you.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for Caribou, Prince George. When I look at this budget, I see, and I know we'll disagree, Mr. Speaker, from the Green Party's point of view, looking to a colleague in the Conservative Party, the previous 10 years' budgets left me devastated in terms of the things that didn't get attention. And my heartbreak with this budget is that the words are there, but the commitment isn't sufficient to meet the promises. So, for instance, I put to my friend from Caribou, Prince George, I agree we need to see infrastructure dollars in those parts of the country because we know the infrastructure deficit is massive. It was one of the things that I'm glad is preserved by this government from the previous administration is maintaining the $3 billion a year gas tax to infrastructure. But I asked my honourable colleague if he doesn't agree that we need more investment in infrastructure, particularly for public transit, that right now is $3.4 billion in this budget over 3 years, which is quite insufficient to the need.
Honourable member for Caribou, Prince George.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to first thank our honourable colleague for her question and her comments. While we may differ on many issues, we do agree and we do share our passion for our communities and for Canada and doing the best we can in representing our region and our riding. Mr. Speaker, I guess my concern would be this, is that rural Canada has seemingly been forgotten in this budget, that whether it's high-speed transit or transit again does nothing in my riding. And I guess if I'm going to my municipalities and saying you need to choose between a transit program or a road infrastructure program, where that balance or that priority is going to be. Again, high-speed transit does nothing in our riding. We are sufficiently, we are okay with our transit program. We need investment in infrastructure. We need investment in jobs, creating the environment so that we have investment in our region. We need a softwood lumber agreement, Mr. Speaker, to bring confidence to our softwood lumber industry, to our forestry industry. We need a Trans-Pacific partnership so that our producers from across Canada can have some confidence that they'll be able to access new markets and so that we can compete on the global stage. Thank you.